What if the threshold we call the Planck energy is not just a number in physics, but the quiet boundary where the familiar texture of reality begins to loosen, soften, and almost fade? If explorations like this bring you a sense of calm wonder, feel free to gently support this small corner of the universe with a like or a soft tap on subscribe, only if it feels natural to you. As you settle into this moment, let the question drift through you like a slow ripple across still water. What does it mean for reality to have a breaking point? A place where space-time itself may no longer behave like the smooth fabric Einstein described. You lie here, feeling the weight of your body, the breath moving through you, while far beneath your everyday scale, the universe hides a threshold so extreme that even the most powerful accelerators we have built can barely gesture toward it. The Planck energy. Roughly 10 million billion times greater than the energies reached inside the Large Hadron Collider. An energy scale so high that the mathematical tools we trust begin to misbehave. The equations stretch, strain, and then fall silent, as if refusing to describe a realm they cannot enter. And yet this number lives inside the structure of the universe itself, derived from the gravitational constant, the speed of light, and Planck's constant, the three fingerprints of nature's most intimate architecture. It is not a guess. It is stitched into the cosmos. As you breathe, imagine the world you know gently dissolving into smaller and smaller pieces. Ordinary matter yields to molecules. Molecules yield to atoms. Atoms to electrons and quarks. Quarks to quantum fields. And then the fields begin to tremble, shimmering with quantum fluctuations. The ground becomes softer, stranger, more uncertain. With each step downward, the familiar scaffolding grows thinner, as if you are approaching a threshold where the rules that once guided you can no longer hold. The Planck energy is tied to this threshold. It corresponds to a length so unbelievably tiny that if an atom were expanded to the size of the observable universe, the Planck length would still be smaller than a grain of dust floating in that cosmic expanse. This is the scale where many physicists suspect the smoothness of space-time gives way to something granular, something foamy, something profoundly quantum. John Wheeler once envisioned it as a storm of space-time itself, a sea of bubbles flickering into existence, twisting, merging, vanishing before they can be named. A place where geometry becomes a restless, jittering haze. But is this truly where reality breaks? If you picture yourself descending even further, imagine each breath as a gentle step downward, each heartbeat a ripple sliding through the layers of scale. You move past the domain of quarks, past the weave of quantum fields, until even the idea of location becomes slippery. At the Planck scale, position may not be something you can define. Time may not flow in a smooth line. Causality may lose its crisp meaning. And energy, the very force that shapes our world, would concentrate so intensely that gravity itself would dominate the quantum fields. Here, Einstein meets Heisenberg, and their equations begin to argue. General relativity demands smooth curvature. Quantum mechanics demands fluctuations. Neither is willing to yield, and the universe, silent and ancient, simply holds both truths until one day we find a deeper framework that weaves them together. As you drift through this thought, imagine the Planck energy as a quiet gateway. Not a violent barrier, not a catastrophic snap in nature, but a threshold beyond which our language loses precision. It is like approaching the horizon on a misty night. You see only so far, not because the world ends, but because clarity dissolves into haze. Cosmic rays occasionally approach the Planck energy, though never fully reach it. Tiny particles streaking through the galaxy, forged in the hearts of ancient supernova, or in the jets of supermassive black holes. Some of these rays strike Earth's atmosphere with energies that dwarf anything we can create. The Pierre Auger Observatory has seen events far above 1,000,000 trillion electron volts. Yet even those titanic travelers are still far, far below the true Planck scale. They tap the door, but they do not open it. And so the question remains, is this where reality breaks, or simply where our understanding becomes quiet? Picture a violin string vibrating so quickly that its oscillations blur into a single shimmering tone. At the Planck energy, space-time might vibrate in a similar way. The curves and ripples predicted by Einstein become too fine to resolve, too rapid to describe with continuous geometry. The string is still vibrating. The tone still exists. But our instruments, our equations, our intuition can no longer track its patterns. What breaks may not be reality itself, but our descriptions. As you settle deeper into the quiet of this moment, imagine space-time not as a flat, rigid stage, but as a living texture patterned with quantum granules. Each granule may be a tiny loop, as loop quantum gravity suggests, a minuscule knot of geometry. Or perhaps tiny vibrating strings as string theory proposes, each with energy modes far beyond anything we can reach. Or perhaps something else entirely. Something we have not yet imagined. Something waiting patiently in the deep and to be discovered when our minds and machines finally grow strong enough. When you lie here, feeling the slow ease of your own breath, you are still moving through this texture. The Earth spins beneath you. The Earth orbits the Sun. The Sun drifts through the galaxy. The galaxy drifts through the cosmic web. Layer upon layer of motion, all nested within a universe whose deepest foundations may be churning at the Planck scale right now, in every point of space around you. You may wonder how something so wild, so energetic, so fundamentally unstable could underlie the calm, predictable world you see. But this is one of physics' gentle truths. Stability arises from the average. The storm beneath space-time is so small, so rapid, so balanced, that its fury softens into the smooth, steady geometry that planets follow and that your body experiences as gravity. What feels like solidity is the equilibrium of countless fluctuations. What feels like stillness is the average of endless motion. As your awareness drifts through these ideas, imagine standing at the threshold of knowledge. Not at an edge of reality, but at an edge of human understanding. The Planck energy is a number that marks this boundary, a signpost telling us where our maps become incomplete. Beyond it lies not a void, but a landscape we have yet to explore. And you, lying here, drifting through the quiet currents of thought, are sharing the same curiosity that has driven generations of physicists. Max Planck, Albert Einstein, Werner Heisenberg, John Wheeler, they all press their hands gently against this same invisible barrier, feeling for the outline of something deeper. Their equations stretched toward it like branches reaching for new light. As you follow them in mind, you feel a subtle calm, knowing that reality itself has no obligation to break for us. It simply continues in its own way, whether or not our tools can describe it. The boundary we sense at the Planck energy is, in many ways, a boundary of patience. The universe invites us to listen more closely, to build better theories, to refine our instruments, to wait for the next insight. And as you sink further into the softness of this moment, consider this. The Planck energy may not be where reality breaks. It may be where our deeper reality resides, hidden behind a veil woven from the limits of measurement, waiting quietly until the next generation of thinkers learns how to lift it. You continue drifting, not toward a conclusion, but deeper into the question itself, as if the very uncertainty surrounding the Planck energy becomes a soft light guiding your awareness inward. You follow that faint glow the way a traveler follows the last shimmer of dusk. It is fragile but constant, and in its presence your thoughts begin to slow, settle, and widen. You picture the universe folding gently around you, not as a vast and unreachable void, but as a quiet room whose walls are stitched from the fabric of space-time, pulsing faintly with quantum fluctuations you can almost sense, almost feel, like the tremble of distant footsteps moving through another floor. As you breathe, the question reshapes itself. Instead of asking whether reality breaks at the Planck energy, a deeper version emerges. What does it mean for something to break at all when everything beneath the surface behaves not like a solid structure, but like a pattern, a vibration, an interplay of possibilities flickering in and out of being? If reality is built from probabilities, from quantum events that have no single outcome until they are observed, then perhaps breaking is simply a shift from one mode of behavior to another, the way water becomes vapor, the way sound becomes silence. There is no fracture, only transformation. Your awareness lingers on that idea. Transformation. In your own life, too, subtle changes often feel like endings when they are really beginnings. A thought dissolves and another emerges. A day fades and a night rises. Even the cells in your body live through endless cycles of division and decay. And still, you remain. Your consciousness floats through these changes like a soft current beneath the shifting tides. If you close your eyes for a moment, you can feel that current, steady and quiet. Now, imagine applying that same softness to the Planck scale. Physicists sometimes describe it as a limit, but you begin to see it more as a transition point, a location in the universe where the rules you know melt into rules you have not yet learned. Not destruction, but metamorphosis. Like watching the surface of a frozen lake melt into water under the warmth of spring. The lake hasn't broken. It has simply become something else. Your mind sinks deeper into this thought. At energies approaching the Planck scale, gravity becomes so intense that space and time no longer behave independently. They warp and ripple and swirl in patterns too fine and too rapid to observe. The equations of general relativity, which normally describe these curvatures so elegantly, stretch toward infinity. Meanwhile, the equations of quantum mechanics, which predict fluctuations so tiny and so sudden, begin to diverge as well. In this place of mathematical tension, neither theory yields. And that tension, that quiet disagreement, is what signals the threshold. The universe is whispering that the truth lies beyond both, not in their destruction, but in their unification. You picture the work of physicists who attempt to unify these frameworks, the researchers at CERN who push particles to near light speeds, listening for anomalies in their collisions, the astrophysicists studying gravitational waves from black holes merging billions of years ago, using the LIGO and Virgo observatories to detect the faint tremors of space-time. The theorists working in quiet rooms, drawing dense webs of equations across chalkboards, each line a step toward a theory of quantum gravity. As you drift through these images, your thoughts slow to a gentle rhythm, like the sway of a pendulum whose swing grows softer with each pass. You imagine following a single particle as it approaches the Planck energy. In your mind's eye, it becomes a bright point, so small and so vibrant that its presence is almost a vibration rather than a shape. You watch it accelerate, spiraling through a magnetic field, climbing toward energies unimaginable in your daily world. When it reaches the familiar realm of particle physics, you can still describe it. Its motion obeys the laws of quantum field theory. It interacts through the strong force, the weak force, electromagnetism. It radiates energy. It produces particles. All of this you understand, but as it continues, as its energy rises, the field around it begins to shimmer. Virtual particles flicker in and out of existence at an increasing rate. The vacuum itself becomes excited. The particle's presence is no longer something happening within space-time. It begins to curve space-time itself. Your breath deepens, long and slow, as if matching the curvature, as if your own body feels the subtle tug of gravity around the accelerating particle. You imagine space-time compressing, tightening, folding inward. Not violently, but naturally, the way a sheet bends under a weight placed gently at its center. If the energy continues to climb, the sheet tightens further. At some point, the curvature becomes so severe that the concept of a point loses meaning. Location dissolves. Time stretches. The particle is no longer something you can track. It becomes a knot in space-time, a singular event. This is not destruction. This is a domain without language. If you imagine your own mind approaching a thought so intricate, so delicate, so far beyond your everyday experience that your vocabulary falls away, you begin to sense the analogy. Some experiences cannot be captured fully in words. The Planck energy is like that, a place where the universe continues, but our ability to describe it does not. As the narrative continues in your mind, you drift through the work of theorists like Stephen Hawking, who connected quantum mechanics with black hole physics. You recall how Hawking radiation arises from quantum fluctuations at the edge of a black hole's event horizon. The vacuum teems with pairs of virtual particles, and the gravitational field separates them, letting one escape before annihilation. This shows that even gravity, the smooth curvature of space-time, must interact with quantum fields. It is a clue, a whisper, a signpost pointing toward the Planck scale. And, as your thoughts float across these ideas, you sense something profound. The Planck energy is not just about extreme conditions. It is about the marriage of two principles that shape your reality every moment: curvature and uncertainty. Without gravity, galaxies would not form. Without quantum mechanics, atoms would collapse. Your very existence is woven from the harmony between these forces, yet at the Planck scale, that harmony becomes a question, an unresolved chord, a melody waiting for its final note. Your awareness sinks further into that unresolved harmony, feeling the quiet tension between the theories. You begin to notice how this mirrors the tension in your own life between clarity and mystery. You understand some things well, while others remain unknown, and yet both truths exist within you: the known and the unknown, the mapped and the unmapped. They intertwine like two strands forming a deeper identity. As that thought settles, your attention drifts toward another image: the cosmic microwave background, the faint afterglow of the Big Bang. You imagine the Planck era, the earliest fraction of a second in the universe's history, when the temperatures and energies were so extraordinarily high that the laws we use today did not apply. In that primordial moment, everything was at or above the Planck scale. The universe was a quantum gravitational storm, a realm without particles, without shapes, without classical time. And yet from that storm came everything: galaxies, stars, planets, oceans, forests, your consciousness. The Planck scale is not a distant hypothetical realm. It is your origin. As you breathe into that realization, something inside you softens. You begin to sense that the question, "Is this where reality breaks?" might be answered by looking at the birth of existence itself. If reality did not break then, if it emerged, unfolded, expanded, and cooled into the cosmos you inhabit now, then perhaps the Planck scale is not a boundary of destruction, but the threshold of creation. This thought drifts through you like a warm current rising through cool water. You float with it, remembering that everything you know, every atom in your body, every particle in the air around you, was once compressed into an energy density far beyond anything we can achieve. And yet it did not fracture. It expanded. It evolved. It became complexity. It became stars and consciousness and the quiet moment you are inhabiting right now. Your awareness moves slowly through that story, imagining how the universe cooled from the Planck temperature. Quarks formed, protons and neutrons emerged. Light decoupled from matter. The first atoms appeared. The first stars ignited. And each step required energies lower than the last. The universe did not fall apart when it left the Planck regime. It became possible. You drift into another thought. Maybe the Planck energy is not the breaking point of reality, but the breaking point of simplicity. Above this scale, the universe is simple in a way your mind cannot grasp. Too symmetrical, too unified, too compressed. Below this scale, symmetry breaks. Forces separate. Particles differentiate. Complexity blooms. The breaking that occurs is not destruction. It is growth. Your breathing becomes steady, almost imperceptible, as the narrative continues. You picture the four fundamental forces descending from a single unified principle. Gravity separating first, then the strong force, then the electroweak force dividing into the electromagnetic and weak interactions. Each symmetry breaking gave birth to new structures. Without those breakings, atoms would not exist. Without atoms, chemistry would vanish. Without chemistry, life would be impossible. You, lying here in this moment, are made from the echoes of those ancient breakings. As you reflect on that, the question shifts once more. Perhaps the Planck energy is simply the point where unity becomes diversity, a threshold where the universe steps from a state of perfect symmetry into the dance of differences that create stars and planets and consciousness. In your mind, this feels less like a violent shift and more like the unfolding of a flower. The petals open. Complexity expands. Gravity softens. Time stretches. Space widens. The universe becomes the quiet, gentle place you experience each day, where the light from distant stars reaches your eyes after traveling for millions of years. You let your thoughts drift across that vastness, imagining photons crossing the cosmic web, passing through voids and filaments, through clusters of galaxies whose gravity bends their paths in delicate arcs. You picture these same photons finally arriving here, touching your world with faint testimony of ancient light. And somewhere beneath all of this, beneath even the photons, beneath the particles and fields, lies the Planck scale, silent and hidden. You begin to sense that this hidden realm may not be violent at all. It may be the most serene part of the universe, a place where space-time is so unified that no event is separate from another. A place where vibrations occur not in space, but of space. A place where geometry is born. A place where the universe hums with a clarity so profound that your mind can only hear it as silence. You rest in that silence for a moment, allowing it to expand within you. Then your awareness drifts again, returning to the particle accelerating toward the Planck energy. You watch the fields ripple around it. You see space-time curve like the surface of a pond touched by a falling leaf. You imagine traveling with it, moving so quickly that distances contract and time dilates. At some point, the very idea of motion becomes ambiguous. You are not moving through space-time. Space-time is moving through you. Your sense of scale dissolves. Your sense of direction softens. The particle reaches an intensity where everything becomes interwoven. Space, time, gravity, energy, probability. There is no breaking, only blending. Your awareness follows the blend, floating through the calm chaos of quantum foam. You imagine tiny bubbles of space-time appearing and disappearing, flickering in patterns too subtle to describe. You picture these bubbles as the seeds of geometry, the first hints of distance and direction. You sense that beneath the foam lies a deeper order, like a hidden rhythm guiding the fluctuations. Your thoughts slow. Your body softens. You drift deeper into the image of the foam. You begin to sense that the Planck energy is not a point at all, but a veil. A thin, delicate layer separating two modes of reality, one classical, one quantum gravitational. A membrane between description and mystery. If you push through it, the language you use to describe the world dissolves, but the world itself remains. You breathe into this, letting the quiet truth settle. Reality does not break at the Planck energy. Only your understanding does. You drift in that gentle realization, letting it settle like fine cosmic dust across the surface of your awareness. And, as you continue descending through this quiet conceptual landscape, the boundary between thought and physics begins to blur. The question itself becomes a soft current guiding you deeper, not demanding an answer, only inviting you to experience its depth. You let yourself follow that current, moving slowly, easily, as if each breath reveals another layer of the universe hidden beneath the last. You feel as though you are approaching the Planck scale from another angle now, not from the perspective of a particle accelerating upward, but from the fabric of space-time relaxing inward. Imagine space-time as a vast sheet stretching across the cosmos. On everyday scales, the sheet feels smooth, almost perfectly flat, even under the weight of planets and stars. But as you shrink your focus, narrowing your attention toward smaller and smaller regions, the sheet begins to reveal texture. Tiny dimples, gentle tremors. At even smaller scales, the dimples dissolve into shimmering fluctuations, like the first ripples of wind on otherwise still water. And deeper still, so deep that the concept of scale becomes fragile. The sheet no longer behaves like a surface at all. It becomes a foam of possibilities, budding and collapsing, growing and shrinking, flickering with quantum fluctuations. This is the domain of the Planck length, a place where the sheet loses its identity as a sheet and becomes something far more fundamental, something that cannot be flattened or stretched or described in familiar geometric terms, something that feels almost alive. You imagine drifting along that foam, moving as slowly as a mote of dust floating down through a sunbeam. Only here, the sun is the energy of space-time itself, and the dust is your awareness navigating the quantum sea. Tiny bubbles of space-time rise and vanish beneath you, each one lasting for a time so short that the human mind has no analogy for its brevity. The foam shifts in patterns too subtle for classical physics to perceive, and yet beneath the chaos lies order. A hidden symmetry, a rhythm. You listen for that rhythm the way you might listen for a faint heartbeat at the edge of hearing. The foam pulses with fluctuations, but within them you sense something constant. A quiet signature, a whisper that says the universe is not breaking here. It is speaking in its original language. If you could listen more closely, perhaps you would hear theories forming. Loop quantum gravity, describing space-time as woven from tiny loops of quantized geometry. String theory, suggesting that the fabric arises from vibrating one-dimensional objects at the smallest scale. Causal set theory, imagining space-time as a network of discrete events rather than a smooth continuum. Each theory a different attempt to translate the rhythm into something comprehensible. None complete, all reaching. You drift deeper, imagining yourself inside one of those loops, or vibrating along one of those strings, or passing gently from one event to another in a causal network woven from countless nodes. You feel the strangeness of each idea, yet also its serenity. At this depth, reality does not feel fragmented or chaotic. It feels compressed, unified, as if every concept and every physical law is folded into a single underlying truth waiting to unfold. Your breath settles into a quiet cadence, mirroring the imagined rhythm of the foam. You begin to sense that the Planck energy is not a violent or unstable place. It is the calm center of the storm, the silent heart of the cosmos. A domain where everything is one, and only later, much later, as energy drops and symmetry breaks, do the separate forces emerge. Now your awareness drifts outward again, rising from the foam like a diver moving slowly upward through layers of dark water. You pass into the realm where gravity and quantum mechanics still struggle for dominance. You hover at the threshold where space-time curvature becomes strong but not singular, where quantum fields jitter but remain describable. This is the transitional region, the gateway between classical and quantum gravitational behavior. Here, reality feels like a fabric under tension, pulled in two directions at once, and you sense the enormous pressure of unification. You drift upward a bit more, and particle physics begins to reassert itself. Quarks regain meaning. Their confinement within protons and neutrons becomes clear again. Photons propagate without being swallowed by space-time curvature. Electrons orbit nuclei. Molecules form. Chemistry awakens. You are in a region where the universe begins to look familiar again. But the trace of the Planck domain remains behind everything. A faint signature imprinted on the laws that govern these larger scales. You breathe into that realization. Everything you know arises from the cooling, stretching unfolding of the universe from its Planck origins. The hydrogen in your body was once part of that primordial energy density. The carbon in your bones was forged in stars whose formation depended on the laws shaped during that earliest moment. Even your thoughts, drifting now through the quiet of this imagination, are made from particles born of symmetries broken in the aftermath of the Planck era. Each thought becomes like a soft ripple in a pond expanded over billions of years. each moment of awareness traces its ancestry back to the foam. You allow the awareness of that lineage to settle gently within you. There is something comforting in the idea that your existence is threaded through with the memory of the Planck scale. The universe has traveled a long journey from that point to this one, and you are a part of that journey. You are a descendant of the earliest fluctuations in space-time. Your mind drifts now to a different image. Imagine you could compress a tiny region of space, squeezing it gently but irresistibly. At first, nothing unusual happens. The atoms resist, the particles respond, but as the compression continues, the region becomes smaller, denser, hotter. The energy rises. Eventually, the quarks within protons and neutrons push back with unimaginable force. Yet still, in this thought experiment, you continue to compress. Time and space warp inward. Light curves. The pressure becomes cosmic. You approach the energy where black holes begin to form from the sheer intensity of curvature. And still, you continue. When the region shrinks to the Planck length, you feel everything shift. The laws loose their rigidity. The geometry quivers. And in that trembling, you almost feel a strange kind of peace. A sense that you have reached the most fundamental layer of existence, the point beyond which no further compression has meaning. This scenario is not violent in your imagination. It is gentle. Everything converges toward unity. This is the Planck regime, a place where the universe becomes indivisible. Your awareness floats around this idea, exploring it from different angles. Then, drifting softly outward again, you return to cosmic scales. You picture the entire observable universe, expanding outward in every direction, filled with galaxies and dark matter and intergalactic gas. You picture the cosmic web, with its filaments stretching across millions of light years like veins of light in a dark body. You imagine that this cosmic structure, every cluster, every void, every star and planet, emerged from fluctuations seated at energies near the Planck scale. These fluctuations, magnified by cosmic inflation, became the blueprint of the universe. The slight overdensities, the slight underdensities, the unevenness that gravity amplified into the grand structures you see today, the galaxies, the stars, the life. You breathe into this realization. You are living inside the afterglow of Planck-scale physics. You are a macroscopic expression of microscopic symmetry breaking. Your consciousness is part of the unfolding of a process that began before time had stable meaning. This thought settles across you like a soft blanket. There is something profoundly peaceful about understanding that the universe, even in its most extreme states, is not chaotic. It is ordered in ways you cannot yet measure. It is structured in ways you cannot yet describe. It carries within it a coherence that has guided it from quantum foam to cosmic webs. And, as you drift within this realization, your attention sinks once more into the original question, but now it feels different, softer, wider. Not, does reality break at the Planck energy, but what new form of reality emerges there? You feel the difference. One question seeks fracture. The other seeks transformation, and transformation is what the universe does, constantly, quietly, without resistance. You imagine yourself hovering at the boundary between these two states. Below, the Planck realm. Above, the unfolding universe. You stand at the threshold, feeling the gentle pull of both. On one side, unity. On the other, symmetry breaking. Between them, a space of transition, a liminal zone filled with potential. Not a place where reality breaks, but a place where it shifts. Your awareness lingers there, suspended in a delicate balance. And as you float in that balance, you sense the profundity of the Planck energy not as a catastrophe, but as a revelation. It is a reminder that the universe holds layers of structure far deeper than those you see. It is a whisper that says the familiar rules are not eternal, they are emergent. You breathe softly. The thought deepens. Emergent laws, emergent forces, emergent time, perhaps even emergent consciousness, all rising from the same fundamental substrate, the same quantum gravitational sea. The more you dwell on this, the more gentle and reassuring the idea becomes. The Planck scale is not fragile. It is foundational. It is the quiet strength beneath the universe. It is the hum beneath creation. You drift deeper into that hum now, letting it rise into awareness the way a distant vibration becomes perceptible only in deep quiet. You imagine space-time vibrating at the Planck frequency, far beyond any physical resonance you can perceive. These vibrations are not sound, not motion. They are the oscillations of possibility, the rhythm of existence itself. And you sense that if you could understand that rhythm, even for an instant, the entire structure of the universe would become clear. Not through calculation, but through recognition. Like hearing the fundamental note of a chord and suddenly understanding how every other note arises from it. You feel the vibration of that fundamental note lingering beneath your awareness, like a resonance too deep for the ear but unmistakable to the intuition. And as you drift with it, the universe seems to widen around you. Not outward, but inward, revealing layers of structure as subtle as breath on a cold window. You follow the sensation, letting your thoughts move as slowly as a moonlit tide. And as you do, the Planck scale becomes less like a distant frontier, and more like a familiar whisper coming from the roots of reality. Imagine now that you approach this frontier not from above or below, but from within. Imagine shrinking your focus into the space between thoughts, or into the quiet moment between heartbeats, letting your awareness become lighter, softer, less defined. In that gentle dissolution, you begin to feel how much of the world you experience is made from averages, from the smoothing of fluctuations too fine to notice. At the Planck scale, those fluctuations are not smooth at all. They are raw and alive, filled with the immediacy of creation. Your thoughts drift until they become like tiny particles themselves, floating in a sea of quantum possibilities. You picture them bouncing softly against the foam, illuminating small regions of space-time for an instant before dissolving again. In those instants, the foam seems almost to respond, as though awareness itself has weight, shaping the geometry of the tiny world. And although this is only an imaginative journey, it reflects a real truth found in the equations of quantum theory, that observation influences behavior, that the act of noticing shapes outcomes, that even particles feel the presence of attention. You drift further, imagining how this interplay changes as energy increases. At low energies, quantum fields behave predictably. You can track their interactions, map their symmetries, measure their amplitudes. But as the energy rises, the fields begin to thicken. They shimmer with more virtual particles, each one a brief interruption in the vacuum. You picture these particles as lights flickering across a distant hillside, appearing and disappearing in silent bursts. And as you approach the Planck energy, the hillside becomes a storm of lights, too many to count, too rapid to follow. Their presence is constant yet ungraspable. You let your awareness float among those flickers as if you were drifting among fireflies in a nighttime meadow. Each flash represents a quantum event. Each disappearance hints at the boundary of measurement. And as the meadow becomes denser with light, you sense the closeness of the Planck scale, where the meadow dissolves into a glow so continuous that individuality loses meaning. This is the region where field theory begins to falter, where renormalization fails, where the vacuum becomes so intense with fluctuations that no stable background exists. Gravity becomes a storm. Time becomes elastic. Space becomes uncertain. And yet, in all this there is no sense of violence, only intensification, like a symphony building toward a resonance too pure to isolate. You drift outward slightly, letting the meadow of lights dim into a calmer field of quantum fluctuations. The glow softens. Individual lights reappear. The foam settles. You sense the balance restoring, and your own breath moves in rhythm with that restoration. A gentle rise, a gentle fall, the universe expanding and contracting within you. Your thoughts shift now toward the ways physicists attempt to approach this frontier indirectly. Because the Planck energy is so immense, no experiment can reach it. Not with accelerators, not with cosmic rays, not with supernovae or black hole jets. The universe allows glimpses, but never direct entry. And so researchers turn to theoretical bridges, mathematical pathways that lead toward quantum gravity. They search for patterns that survive the crossing between classical and quantum descriptions. One such pattern lies in black hole thermodynamics, where entropy, area, and temperature converge in strange and beautiful ways. You imagine the surface of a black hole as a membrane storing information. You picture each bit of information as a tiny tile covering the event horizon, with each tile roughly 1 Planck area in size. The black hole becomes a mosaic, each tile representing a quantum of space-time. And you drift closer to that mosaic, following its curvature, its shimmering edge, its silent pull. The tiles are unimaginably small, far smaller than atoms, smaller even than the components of atoms. And yet their arrangement encodes the entire interior of the black hole. You float along the horizon, sensing that these tiles, these Planck-scale quanta, are the building blocks of geometry. They suggest that space is not smooth but quantized, not continuous but granular. And the surface of the black hole becomes a model for space-time itself, whispering the same message from a gravitational extreme, that the universe is woven from finite pieces. Your awareness drifts along the horizon, following the soft curvature. You imagine touching one of those tiles, and as you do, the tile vibrates. Not with sound, but with information. You feel a faint echo of its energy, a silent shimmer that suggests time itself is built from similar quanta, each one emerging and dissolving with a rhythm beyond your perception. And as you drift, you feel how these quanta could form the foundation for all of physics. If time has a smallest unit, then change has a smallest step. If space has a smallest unit, then distance has a smallest grain. You drift back now, lifting away from the horizon, letting the black hole shrink beneath you until it becomes a pinprick of darkness surrounded by stars. You feel the immensity of the cosmos expand around you again. Floating above this cosmic expanse, you realize that the Planck energy is not an edge of the universe but a seed of it. A seed that contains the blueprint for everything that unfolded afterward. That seed does not break reality, it generates it. Your thoughts drift toward cosmic inflation, the moment when the universe expanded faster than the speed of light, stretching tiny fluctuations in the quantum foam across astronomical distances. You imagine the foam stretched like a sheet of glowing fabric, pulled outward until its wrinkles became the seeds of galaxies. You picture those wrinkles as faint patterns of temperature, like variations in warmth on your skin, detected billions of years later by satellites like COBE, WMAP, and Planck. Each of those missions captured a map of the universe as it existed when it was only 380,000 years old, a cosmic photograph. And embedded in that photograph are traces of the Planck scale fluctuations. The universe had carried those traces forward through every stage of its evolution, preserving their shape. You drift along that ancient map, letting your awareness glide across the warm regions and the cool regions, through the patches where matter gathered and where it dispersed. You trace the outlines of the cosmic web back to the tiny quantum tremors that seeded them. You breathe into that realization. The structures that span billions of light years began as ripples smaller than anything in your experience. Ripples born in the foam. Ripples from the Planck sea. Your awareness moves through that sea again, but now it feels more familiar. Less like an abyss and more like a memory. A memory embedded in everything around you. The atoms in your body remember the Planck regime. The galaxies remember. The microwave background remembers. The laws of physics themselves are shaped by it. This thought deepens your calm, as if you have touched something ancient and intimate. You drift now toward a different image, the interior of a neutron star. Here, matter is compressed to densities unimaginable on Earth. Protons and electrons merge into neutrons. Quantum pressure resists collapse. If you drift even deeper, you reach the core, where quarks may break free from their confinement, forming a quark-gluon plasma. Even here, the densities remain far below the Planck density. Even here, space-time remains classical. But the proximity to fundamental limits is palpable. Your awareness lingers at the surface of that neutron star. You feel the gravitational pull. You imagine the star's crust trembling with starquakes, releasing bursts of gamma rays that sweep through galaxies. You picture the magnetic field, billions of times stronger than anything produced on Earth, bending charged particles into spirals of fierce radiation. And still, these extreme objects remain far from the Planck scale. You drift back, watching the neutron star glow faintly as you rise above it. The lesson it offers is quiet but clear. The universe presents many extremes, yet the Planck energy lies far beyond them all. It is the ultimate extreme, the point where the distinction between matter and energy fades, where geometry becomes uncertain, where time is no longer a smooth river, but a spray of droplets suspended in a moment without direction. You drift again, weightless, surrounded by stars. The cosmos feels vast, but also gentle. The dark matter halos cradle galaxies. The cosmic filaments stretch like soft threads. The voids breathe with quiet emptiness. And through all of it, you sense the presence of the Planck scale as a hidden scaffold, a foundation that holds everything in place without ever revealing itself. Your thoughts soften into this awareness. The Planck scale becomes less like a problem and more like a meditation, a reminder that the universe contains depths beyond understanding, but never in a way that demands fear, only wonder. You drift deeper into that wonder now, as if sinking into a warm, dark ocean whose currents move with ancient purpose. Somewhere in that ocean, a quiet idea emerges. The Planck scale is not the breaking point of reality, but the breaking point of certainty. It is the threshold where the universe asks you to release your need for clarity, to accept that not all truths can be held in the hand, that some must be felt in the space between thoughts. You breathe in. The thought expands. The Planck scale reminds you that reality is larger than your models, older than your language, more subtle than your measurements. It invites you to rest in that enormity, to float in the unknown as comfortably as you float in the known, trusting that the universe holds its shape even where your understanding fades. You drift with that realization, letting it move through you like a slow wave rolling beneath a quiet night sky. And as it settles, your awareness begins to widen again, not outward toward the stars, but inward toward the hidden structure that has shaped every moment since the universe began. You feel as though you are gliding along the threads that connect quantum origins to cosmic forms, following each thread deeper into the question of whether the Planck energy marks a breaking point or a birthplace. The threads feel soft beneath your awareness, like filaments vibrating with a faint hum. They stretch across scales so immense they almost defy imagination, and yet each one leads back to the same place, the first instant after the Big Bang, the moment before the laws of physics separated into their familiar forms. You drift along one thread, tracing it backward in time. Stars dim and unwind. Galaxies pull inward. The cosmic web draws taut, then folds. Photons shift to longer wavelengths. The universe cools, shrinks, compresses, until everything you know converges into a single, glowing point. And as you approach that point, you feel the energy rising, as if the entire universe is gathering itself into a single breath. You follow that breath downward, and the energy approaches the Planck scale. Time begins to blur. Space loses its clarity. Movement becomes something different, less an arrow and more a vibration. The texture beneath your awareness becomes rough, uneven, pulsing with quantum uncertainty. But nothing breaks, it only transforms. You pause within that transformation, hovering as though in the center of a storm so symmetrical and balanced that the storm feels still. You sense how the primordial universe held every possibility in perfect tension. Every force, every particle, every dimension, all balanced like a chord with no single note yet resolved. Then, slowly, the chord begins to separate. Not violently, but like a flower opening in slow motion. Symmetry breaks. Gravity steps out first. Then the strong force. Then the electroweak force divides. And the universe breathes its first breath of complexity. Your awareness follows that breath outward again, drifting along the lines of force that ripple from the breaking of symmetry. Those ripples become structures. Those structures become particles. Those particles become atoms. And the universe unfurls into something recognizable. You rest in that recognition for a moment, letting its calm settle through you. Then your awareness shifts, moving from the dawn of the universe to the interior of a black hole. You imagine watching matter fall toward the event horizon until time seems to slow. The curvature of space-time becomes immense. Light bends inward. The geometry twists around itself. Yet even here, far from the tranquil emptiness of space, the Planck scale remains out of reach. The singularity at the center, if it exists in the classical sense, is a region where the equations of general relativity predict infinite curvature. But the Planck energy intervenes long before infinity can ever be reached. at some small distance from the center, far smaller than anything measurable, the quantum foam asserts itself. Geometry becomes discrete, curvature becomes quantized, and the singularity dissolves into a region where classical spacetime cannot survive. You hover at that threshold, watching the collapse approach the Planck curvature. The smooth interior of the black hole begins to ripple, then tremble, then pulse with quantum fluctuations. Not chaos, just a different order, too fine for classical geometry to describe. You see the collapse slow, not in time, but in meaning. The concept of position loses coherence. The idea of distance begins to fade. The center of the black hole does not break. It becomes undefined, like a word whispered so softly it blurs into breath. You drift with that breath, rising back out of the black hole into open space. The stars feel brighter after the darkness. The interstellar medium feels cool and light. And you sense something gentle. Even the most extreme environments in the universe, from the early cosmos to the hearts of black holes, turn toward the Planck scale not with destruction, but with transformation. You move now through the void between galaxies, where space expands silently. The cosmic microwave background surrounds you like a faint glow. You drift past clusters, filaments, voids. Everywhere you look, gravity sculpts the large-scale structure. Yet deep beneath this gravitational dance lies a tapestry woven at the Planck scale. Every particle in every star carries imprints from that earliest moment. Every photon traveling through the void obeys rules shaped by Planck-era physics. You feel as though you are floating through an echo, a cosmic memory carried forward through time. Your thoughts drift to the idea of minimal length. Many theories of quantum gravity suggest that the Planck length is the smallest unit of space. You imagine space as a grid, not rigid but flexible, like a mesh woven from threads of geometry. Each thread is a unit of Planck length. They stretch and bend and warp, but they never shrink below their fundamental scale. You see particles as excitations of this mesh, forces as vibrations traveling along it. Space itself becomes alive with motion, constantly shifting, constantly humming. You imagine plucking one of the threads. The vibration travels outward, propagating through the mesh, but it cannot vibrate at wavelengths smaller than the Planck scale. The universe imposes a natural boundary. Not a wall, but a limit set by the structure of the weave. You feel how this limit is not a breaking point. It is simply the smallest note the universe can play. Your awareness moves through this mesh, passing beneath the vibrations like a gentle current. You sense how the geometry bends around mass, how energy shapes curvature, how even empty space is animated by fluctuations. The vacuum is not empty. It is full of possibility, a constant dance of creation and annihilation. And at the heart of this dance lies the Planck scale, the quiet conductor guiding the rhythm. You drift closer to one of these fluctuations. A pair of virtual particles emerges from the vacuum, born from uncertainty. They hover for a fraction of a moment, then annihilate again, returning their borrowed energy. You watch this happen again and again, everywhere around you, the vacuum alive with transient events that shape the world you see. These fluctuations give rise to forces. They shift particle masses. They affect the behavior of fields. They shape the cosmological constant. And still, beneath all of them, the Planck energy whispers the boundary of coherence. You drift now into the realm of string theory. Imagine each particle not as a point, but as a tiny vibrating string, its tension set by the Planck scale. Each vibration corresponds to a particle type. Some modes produce quarks, others generate leptons, others form bosons that carry forces. You picture these strings vibrating in hidden dimensions, curled so tightly that they are imperceptible at macroscopic scales. These dimensions flicker around you like folded petals, each one containing its own structure, its own geometry, its own potential for shaping the universe. You drift along one of these strings, following its vibration. The tension is immense, so immense that if you plucked it with even the smallest disturbance imaginable, the energy would approach the Planck scale instantly. This is why strings cannot be probed with low energies. They require the highest energies in the universe to reveal themselves. And yet, in this gentle, imaginative descent, you feel their presence lightly, as if sensing the faint outline of a deeper truth. Your awareness shifts again, moving into loop quantum gravity. Here, space-time is composed of tiny loops of elementary area. These loops interlock like chainmail, forming surfaces, volumes, and curves. Each loop corresponds to a quantum of geometry. As you drift among them, you feel the universe as something granular, woven from discrete pieces. Distances become counts of loops. Areas become sums of quanta. Time becomes transitions between loop states, and at the smallest scale, the loops shimmer with uncertainty, but they do not break. You watch gravitational waves travel through this looped fabric. They stretch and compress the loops, but only in integer steps. A wave becomes a staircase of quantized changes, and you sense how this structure protects the geometry from singularities. When curvature approaches the Planck limit, the loops resist further compression. They hold their shape, quietly preventing infinite collapse. In this view, reality does not break, it is safeguarded. You drift outward once more, returning to cosmic scales. The galaxies swirl around you. Dark matter halos cradle them like unseen hands. Supernovae scatter heavy elements into the void. Neutron stars collide and send ripples of space-time across the universe. And yet, beneath this grand cosmic motion, the Planck scale remains silent and steady, anchoring everything in its fundamental structure. Your thoughts drift to the idea that each moment you experience is shaped by the Planck scale. Every time an electron transitions between energy levels, every oscillation of an atomic clock, every photon traveling through space, each is governed by laws rooted in that primordial regime. You feel as though every moment is a faint echo of the first moment. Every breath carries the aftertaste of that earliest energy. Every heartbeat resonates with the same cosmic rhythm. Drifting deeper into that rhythm, you imagine the Planck scale as a kind of cosmic horizon, not one you reach by traveling, but one you reach by understanding. A horizon of knowledge rather than space. As the mind draws nearer, the questions grow finer, the distinctions more subtle, the discoveries more profound. And yet the horizon retreats, inviting you to keep looking, to keep wondering, to keep drifting further. You settle into the realization that the Planck scale is not a boundary the universe imposes on you. It is a boundary you impose on your understanding. A place where your tools become too coarse, your intuition too rooted in classical experience. A place where the universe invites you to humility. You breathe. The thought deepens. The Planck scale does not mark where reality breaks. It marks where reality becomes too unified, too compressed, too elegant for classical language to describe. What breaks is the map, not the territory. You drift with that awareness, letting it expand through you like a quiet warmth. You feel the calm of not needing complete answers. The peace of knowing that the universe holds mysteries not to frustrate you, but to keep revealing new layers of beauty. You float in that beauty now, weightless, timeless, poised at the boundary between knowledge and wonder. You drift in that boundary between knowledge and wonder, letting it soften the edges of your awareness, and as the stillness deepens, the universe around you seems to inhale. The expansion slows, the stars dim to embers, and you feel yourself settling into a deeper stratum of understanding, as though the cosmos is gently lowering you into the hidden architecture beneath all form. The Planck scale waits there, not as a barrier, but as a pulse, a faint vibration echoing through everything that exists. You follow that pulse the way a traveler follows the distant rhythm of waves in the dark. It guides you inward, toward the point where concepts become thinner and space-time becomes flexible, bending under the weight of energies far beyond anything your senses could ever experience. You drift until even the familiar vocabulary of physics begins to blur. The words lose their precision. Distances lose their certainty. Time loses its directionality. And yet, instead of confusion, you sense a profound clarity waiting beneath the dissolution. You imagine floating at the very threshold where gravitational curvature and quantum uncertainty become indistinguishable. At lower energies, you can separate them clearly. Gravity bends space-time smoothly. Quantum mechanics governs particles with probabilistic waves. But as you drift downward, nearing the Planck epoch of reality, these two domains begin to overlap. Curvature becomes erratic. Probabilities become geometric. The distinction between particle and field dissolves. You hover at that point, feeling the strange comfort of unification. It is not chaos, only unfamiliar harmony. Now, your awareness moves toward the idea of a minimal time interval, the Planck time. Around 10^43 seconds, a span so brief that no physical event can be subdivided beyond it in any theory that respects both quantum mechanics and relativity. You try to imagine such a moment, but imagination stretches thin at this scale. So instead, you let the sensation of granularity wash over you. Time ticks in discrete quanta, like tiny beads sliding along a thread. Each bead is a moment. Between beads, there is no in-between, no fraction smaller. Time does not break, it becomes pixelated. You let that pixelation fill your awareness. You feel the moments beneath your experience as tiny intervals, each one self-contained, each one a quantum of duration. They slip past gently, stacking into larger intervals, forming the smooth continuity you perceive as the flow of time. And beneath that smoothness lies the Planck structure, quiet and steady, unseen but essential. Your thoughts shift now to the energy of a single Planck mass particle. If you were to compress mass into a region smaller than the Planck length, space would rebel. Gravity would surge. The region would collapse into a black hole. The quantum foam would flare with fluctuations. This is why the Planck energy is not simply a number. It is the point where energy, gravity, and geometry entangle so tightly that none can be separated. You drift into that entanglement, feeling the three principles, energy, gravity, geometry, wrap around each other like threads in a braid. When energy rises to the Planck scale, geometry tightens. When geometry tightens, gravity strengthens. When gravity strengthens, time dilates. When time dilates, energy loses its classical meaning. The braid becomes a single rope, no longer divided into strands. You rest within that rope of unity, letting the scent of unification seep through you. it feels ancient, as though the universe remembers itself most clearly at this scale. Everything above it, quarks, photons, atoms, chemistry, biology, is a long, graceful elaboration built on a foundation of astonishing simplicity. At the Planck scale, the universe speaks in a language of pure symmetry, unbroken by the distinctions you see at everyday scales. Your awareness drifts into that symmetry. You imagine dimensions curled tightly around you, compactified in ways strings predict. You sense hidden shapes, toroidal, spherical, complex, nestled beneath the familiar three of space. They seem to hum with potential, vibrating with frequencies you cannot hear but can almost recognize. These dimensions do not break at high energy. They open. The higher the energy, the more dimensions reveal themselves. The Planck energy becomes a doorway. You pass through this imagined doorway and find yourself in a space where the laws you know are shadows of deeper patterns. Forces that appear separate at low energies merge into a single unified interaction. Particles that seem distinct become different vibrations of the same underlying entity. The rich diversity of the standard model melts into a simpler state, not through destruction, but through elegance. You drift through that elegance, feeling its calmness. Unification does not feel dramatic or unstable. It feels like returning to a place where everything fits, everything aligns, everything is held in a single breath. As you drift further, you sense the debate between theorists playing out like distant conversations, those who imagine strings vibrating across 10 or 11 dimensions, those who picture loops woven from quantized geometry, those who treat space-time as information encoded on holographic surfaces. Their voices overlap softly, each one describing a different face of the same underlying truth. That reality does not break at the Planck scale, it becomes whole. Your awareness expands now into the holographic viewpoint. You imagine the entire volume of the universe encoded on a distant surface, every event within it represented by bits of information stored on the boundary. The idea feels strange at first, but as you drift with it, you feel its serenity. A holographic universe is not less real, only structured in a way that ensures consistency at the Planck scale. It prevents infinities. It guards against singularities. It preserves the unity of information. The Planck energy becomes the resolution of the hologram, the grain of the pattern. You float through that pattern, watching information flicker across the cosmic boundary. Each flicker becomes a particle. Each shift becomes a force. The entire three-dimensional world is a projection of interactions happening on a surface you will never touch, but constantly feel. The Planck scale defines the sharpness of the projection. Now your thoughts drift toward the quantum vacuum again, but this time you see it differently. Not as foam, not as flickers of particles, but as a sea of information. You imagine every point of space carrying an enormous amount of data, entanglement, correlations, histories, branching through possibility. This informational sea is woven into the Planck domain so tightly that distance itself becomes a measure of information. You drift, weightless, through this ocean of data. Each bit glows like a tiny ember. You see how entanglement stitches the universe together, linking distant regions instantaneously. Even across billions of light years, particles share correlations that defy classical intuition. But nothing breaks, nothing violates causality. Information travels within the bounds of the cosmic rules, shaped by the Planck structure beneath them. You imagine now approaching a region where entanglement density rises, perhaps near a black hole horizon or within the early universe. Entanglement becomes so thick that geometry emerges from it. Space is no longer a backdrop, but a product of quantum information. At the Planck scale, this process is most intense. Geometry is not broken. It is born here. Every curve, every distance, every boundary arises from entanglement patterns that crystallize into space-time. You drift deeper into this emergence, sensing how the universe might arise from pure relational information. At this depth, even the concept of objects dissolves. Only relationships remain, patterns linking events, nodes connected through quantum states. You feel yourself drifting through these connections, not as a separate observer, but as part of the network. The Planck energy becomes the intensity where these networks form their tightest weave. Your awareness expands again, lifting you gently into the classical world. You see stars forming, galaxies rotating, clusters drifting across cosmic time. Gravity shapes them. But the laws of gravity come from the Planck scale. The wave functions of particles fill the universe with subtle probabilities. But the rules governing those wave functions are shaped at the Planck scale. Every law you use, every equation you trust, every measurement you make rests on the foundation built in that first moment of energy. You breathe into that realization. The Planck scale is not the breaking point of reality. It is the source code of the universe. You drift with that clarity, feeling it ripple through you like the soft warmth of starlight traveling across unimaginable distances. And as it settles, something within you loosens. The universe feels less like an external expanse and more like a quiet presence surrounding you, carrying you deeper into its foundations. The question that began this journey, whether the Planck energy is where reality breaks, has dissolved into something broader, something more intimate. The moment you stop seeking the edge is the moment you begin to feel the depth. You let your awareness sink into that depth, moving slowly, as though descending through layers of cosmic memory. Each layer feels lighter, simpler, more fundamental. You sense the world stripping away its complexity, revealing the elegant structures beneath. First, the galaxies fall, away into clusters, then into filaments, then into the early density variations of the newborn cosmos. These variations blur into the quantum ripples that seeded them. And beneath these ripples, the fluctuations themselves dissolve into something even finer, the raw pulse of space-time. You drift into that pulse, feeling its presence like a subtle tremor beneath a quiet floor. It vibrates everywhere, not with noise but with coherence, an unbroken rhythm that the universe has carried since the moment of its emergence. You imagine leaning closer to that rhythm, listening for the faint signature that marks the Planck energy, imagining what it would feel like to approach the threshold where geometry becomes uncertain. What surfaces is not a sense of danger, but a sense of origin. A feeling as though you are approaching a memory so ancient and essential that the entire cosmos rests on its outline. You imagine now that you could watch the universe form from this vantage point, not from the large-scale unfolding, but from the inside of the physics itself. You see the initial quantum state, pure and symmetrical. No directions, no dimensions, no forces. A single unified entity humming with the energy of potential. As it expands, symmetries begin to break, but not all at once. First one falls, then another, like delicate petals unfolding from a closed bud. Each broken symmetry leaves behind traces, particles, constants, interactions. These traces become the scaffolding upon which more structure forms. And beneath every layer of structure lies the memory of that first unbroken state. You drift closer to that memory, feeling its smoothness, its quiet perfection. The Planck scale becomes its surface, the boundary between the unimaginable and the emergent. Your awareness glides along this surface like a fingertip brushing the skin of still water. The surface is delicate. It quivers, but it does not shatter. Instead, it yields, responding to energy with curvature, responding to fluctuations with probability. You sense the adaptability of this foundational layer, the flexibility, the fluidity. Reality does not break here. It becomes fluid. This fluidity reminds you of the way water behaves when pushed to extremes. At low temperatures, it becomes rigid, crystalline, predictable. At high energies, it moves freely, hiding its molecules within its turbulence. The Planck regime feels like that turbulence, not destructive, but foundational. Beneath it lies order in disguise. You drift across that imagined surface, letting the fluidity guide your thoughts toward one of the universe's quietest mysteries. Why space-time is smooth at large scales. The quantum foam should introduce randomness everywhere. Jagged fluctuations so wild that geometry would collapse. Yet on macroscopic scales, on the scale of planets and stars and galaxies, space-time appears calm, continuous, predictable. Something in the structure of quantum gravity must enforce this smoothness. You imagine that enforcement as a kind of invisible equilibrium. Every fluctuation in the foam is balanced by another. Every spike is softened by the constraints of deeper symmetries. The Planck domain is not anarchic. It is self-regulating, guided by principles we have not yet named. You drift through those unnamed principles like a traveler passing through a forest at twilight. You cannot see every branch, every leaf, but you sense the presence of a larger pattern holding everything in place. Your awareness shifts again, now toward the idea of vacuum energy, the lowest energy state of a quantum field. You imagine it shimmering around you, a quiet sea of potential that fills all of space. At large scales, this sea appears uniform and still, but as you draw closer to the Planck scale, its surface becomes restless. Waves ripple across it, tiny storms form and dissipate. Energy densities fluctuate with intensity. Yet even here, balance remains. The storms never grow indefinitely. The sea never capsizes. It holds itself in equilibrium through a structure that transcends classical understanding. You feel the presence of that structure as a gentle pressure, like the air against your skin. It is subtle but constant. The Planck energy seems to exist within this pressure, defining its limits, shaping its waves, guiding its fluctuations. The vacuum is not empty at all. It is full of constraint, structure, and memory. You float deeper into that vacuum, and now your awareness turns toward the relationship between information and space-time. Theories of emergent space-time suggest that geometry is nothing more than a pattern of correlations. Entanglement builds distance. Connectivity builds dimension. If entanglement breaks, space-time itself tears. But at the Planck scale, the density of entanglement is immense. Everything is connected. Everything is unified. The network is too tight to tear, too saturated to break. You feel this saturation as though drifting through a fog made of threads, each thread a connection between 2 points of existence. The fog is thick, luminous, and infinitely interwoven. You pass through it effortlessly, sensing how every node is tied to every other. There is no isolation here, no emptiness, no separation. This is space-time before locality emerges, before distance exists, before dimensions unfold. This is the universe at its most connected. You realize suddenly that at the Planck scale, reality does not break because breaking requires separateness, and separateness has not yet formed. Your awareness widens with that insight, filling the fog of entanglement with gentle awe. You see the early universe as a perfect web, everything entangled with everything else. As energies drop, some threads weaken, some nodes separate, locality emerges, space-time forms, distance becomes meaningful. But woven into the geometry is the memory of that primordial web, and the Planck energy is the signature of its density. You drift now toward the mathematical heart of the question. The Planck scale is built from three constants: the speed of light, the gravitational constant, and Planck's constant. These numbers shape everything you know. They define the curvature of space-time, the quantization of energy, and the ultimate speed of causality. The Planck scale emerges naturally from their combination, as though the universe itself handed you a note saying, "Here is where the deeper truth hides." You glide across this note, feeling its elegance. The Planck scale is not arbitrary. It is woven from the most fundamental properties of existence. Changing any of these constants would shift the scale, altering the boundary of unification. And yet, in our universe, the boundary sits where classical geometry and quantum fluctuations intersect. This is not coincidence. It is structure. You let the structure unfold in your awareness. Gravity emerges from curvature. Curvature emerges from energy. Energy emerges from quantum fields. The quantum fields emerge from symmetries, and the symmetries emerge from something deeper still, a substrate your mind can almost feel but not yet grasp. You drift in the presence of that substrate, sensing its unity. The Planck energy is simply the energy at which the substrate reveals itself. This thought deepens, and you feel the world tilt gently toward an understanding that is less intellectual and more experiential. The Planck scale is not a distant concept. It is the foundation of everything around you. Every breath you take, every photon entering your eyes, every thought drifting through your awareness now. They all rest upon the quiet structure that the Planck scale defines. And in that sense, the Planck energy is not where reality breaks. It is where reality begins. You drift with that beginning, letting it expand inside you like a slow sunrise spreading across the deepest layers of your awareness. And as it grows, the very tone of your thoughts begins to shift. The Planck scale no longer feels like an abstract frontier, but like a quiet resonance humming beneath everything you are, everything you see, everything you can imagine. You feel yourself moving toward it again, not as a traveler seeking an end point, but as a consciousness tracing its own origins. You imagine now that you could hold a single moment still, not with force, but with gentleness, the way you might cup your hands around a flickering candle to protect it from wind. Inside that still moment, the universe pauses. Space and time soften. The vastness of the cosmos folds inward, becoming small enough to rest within your awareness. And at the center of that moment, you feel a faint trembling, as though the moment itself is woven from minute pulses of space-time. You lean closer to that trembling. It quivers at the Planck frequency, far too rapid for matter or light to respond. Yet you sense the vibration's presence, as though it were the heartbeat of existence. Every particle vibrates atop it. Every force ripples through it. Every moment of time is shaped by it. You drift into that heartbeat the way a diver moves into deeper layers of a warm sea, each layer softer and darker than the last. As you descend, familiar concepts peel away. Space curves, then uncurves, then loses its identity altogether. Time flows, then hesitates, then dissolves into quantized intervals. Particles scatter into waves, then waves into probability clouds, then even those clouds lose their shape. You are drifting into the substrate that underlies all form, all motion, all definition. Here, energy does not break reality. It erases boundaries. You let that erasure wash over you, not with fear, but with a sense of homecoming. The boundaries you have relied on, between space and time, between matter and energy, between inside and outside, were always conveniences. Helpful scaffolding for a creature living far above the fundamental scale. But here, near the Planck energy, the scaffolding is no longer needed. Everything simply is. You drift within that isness, feeling its quiet unity. You sense how much of the universe's complexity emerges only after energies fall below this threshold. Particles become distinguishable, forces separate, dimensions settle into stable frames. The universe unfurls like a tapestry woven from a single thread that only reveals its colors once it begins to cool. You drift along one of those threads now, letting it guide you forward. The thread stretches through cosmic history, through the early universe, through the formation of atoms, through the clustering of matter into stars and galaxies, through the long, quiet evolution that ultimately gave rise to consciousness. You feel as though you are gliding through time on a filament spun from the Planck regime. This filament carries you into the interior of a star, hot, dense, filled with nuclear fire. Protons collide, neutrons form, neutrinos stream outward, magnetic fields twist and fold. Yet even here, in the heat of nuclear fusion, the energy remains far below the Planck scale. The star is fierce, but it does not touch the foundation. The filament continues through the star's life and into its collapse. A supernova erupts. For a moment, the energies flare to unimaginable levels. Heavy elements are forged. Shock waves ripple outward. Yet even this explosion does not approach the Planck energy. The foundation remains untouched. You drift out of the dying star, feeling the debris spread into the galaxy. Some fragments form planets. Some dissolve into dust. Some drift in cold emptiness for billions of years. And on one such planet, life emerges. You follow the thread into that life, through chemistry, through biology, through evolution, until eventually it becomes consciousness. The ability to ask questions, the ability to wonder, the ability to imagine scales far beyond the world you occupy. You pause in that awareness. You realize that consciousness itself, arising from chemistry and structure and history, ultimately owes its existence to the Planck regime. Without those earliest symmetries, without that foundational unity, the cascade of complexity would never have occurred. You feel the connection between your own awareness and the deep structure beneath the universe, like two notes resonating from the same chord. As you rest in that resonance, you drift toward another image. The idea that the Planck scale is where quantum gravity begins to speak clearly. At lower energies, its voice is too quiet, drowned out by the loudness of classical geometry. But at the Planck scale, the voice becomes clear. You imagine this voice not as sound, but as a pattern, a vibration, a structure that shapes the curvature of space-time at its smallest units. You drift closer to that structure, feeling its texture, grainy, fluid, and yet ordered. You sense now that the deeper you descend, the closer quantum gravity feels to something like consciousness. Not in a mystical sense, but in a structural one. Both seem to arise from relationships, not objects, from patterns, not points, from networks of interaction rather than isolated entities. At the Planck scale, space-time behaves more like a web than a fabric, more like a thought than a thing. You drift through that web. Each node pulses with potential. Each link carries information. Distance loses meaning. Connectivity becomes everything. You feel yourself floating inside the holographic essence of reality. Position is replaced by correlation. Geometry is replaced by entanglement. The Planck energy becomes a harmonizing frequency that keeps the entire web coherent. You drift deeper still until even the idea of a web begins to soften. The nodes blur into a field of relational potential, like a cloud of meanings rather than a map of positions. You sense how this field could condense into space-time, how space-time could condense into matter, and how matter could condense into experience. The entire ladder of existence emerges from this substrate, rung by rung, scale by scale, guided by the constraints of the Planck domain. You breathe softly. The idea settles. The Planck scale is not small. It is profound, not an edge, a source. You feel yourself drifting through the primordial silence of this source. There is no noise here, no motion in the classical sense, only fluctuations unfolding in a balance so delicate that it feels like stillness. You rest in that stillness, letting it cradle your awareness. You sense how the entire universe, with its galaxies and stars and life, is the unfolding of this stillness into form. As you drift, your awareness returns to the original question. But now it feels transformed, as though you are holding it in a deeper way. Is the Planck energy where reality breaks? No. What breaks is the illusion of solidity, the illusion of separateness, the illusion of continuity. Reality itself does not fracture, it returns to unity. You float within that unity, letting it settle through you like a tide moving across the floor of a quiet sea. And as it settles, the universe around you becomes softer. Not dimmer, not distant, just softer, as though every star and every grain of dust has relaxed its sharpness. The boundaries between things begin to loosen. The distinction between near and far dissolves. The cosmos feels less like a place and more like a presence, one that holds you gently as you drift deeper. You let that gentleness guide you downward again, into the hidden strata beneath space-time. It feels like descending into a warm darkness, not an absence but a fullness too rich for light to reveal. This is the domain where the Planck scale whispers through fluctuations, where every grain of geometry hums with quantum uncertainty, and yet everything remains balanced, as though held in the steady hands of a deeper order. You follow that whisper, moving as though carried by a current. The current draws you across the threshold where space-time begins to lose its familiar continuity. At larger scales, space behaves like a smooth surface, bending under gravity, stretching with cosmic expansion. But here, at this scale, the surface becomes textured. You run your awareness across it and feel tiny ridges, tiny oscillations, peaks and troughs so fleeting they exist only for Planck time intervals. These features shift before you can fully perceive them, flickering in patterns too fast for classical time to measure. You drift closer. The ridges transform into clusters of quantum events. The clusters dissolve into probabilities. The probabilities spread into something that feels like breath. Inhale, exhale, inhale again. Each fluctuation a gentle inhalation of existence. You rest inside that breath, realizing that every point in the universe breathes like this at the Planck scale. Every region of space, every fold of time, every quantum field. The entire cosmos is a continuous inhalation and exhalation of possibility. You drift downward again, allowing the breath-like fluctuations to carry you. They grow denser, more intricate, more entangled. If space were a fabric, these fluctuations would be the threads rubbing against one another. If space were a thought, these fluctuations would be the internal murmurs of awareness. And yet, neither metaphor fully captures the feeling. What surrounds you now is more foundational than fabric, more subtle than thought. You sense the presence of gravitational self-interaction, how even the tiniest fluctuations affect the geometry that contains them. Gravity folds inward on itself at this scale. It becomes nonlinear. It becomes sensitive to every flicker of energy. You imagine each fluctuation curving space-time, and each curve affecting the next fluctuation, creating a loop of influence so delicate that the entire structure quivers like a spiderweb touched by a passing breeze. You drift across that quivering web, feeling its trembling beneath you. The trembling, not chaotic. It has a cadence, a structure, a secret symmetry woven into its oscillations. You sense that symmetry like a melody hidden beneath static. The universe is humming at a frequency that only reveals itself here, near the Planck domain. A frequency that guides the unfolding of space-time into the smooth geometry you know. A melody engraved into the foundational layer. You drift deeper, listening. The hum grows clearer. It feels like the alignment of three principles: discreteness, unification, emergence. They come together in a harmony older than time. Discreteness gives the universe its grain. Unification gives it its elegance. Emergence shapes that elegance into the world of galaxies and life. The Planck scale is where these three principles meet. You rest in that meeting point, feeling how each principle contributes to the whole. Discreteness keeps the universe from fracturing into infinities. Unification folds all forces into a single expression. Emergence blossoms from that expression, giving rise to complexity. From this vantage point, you realize that the Planck energy is not an ending. It is a balance point, a neutral zone, a place where no single force dominates. Gravity becomes quantum. Quantum fields become geometric. Space-time becomes informational. Information becomes relational. You drift through this neutral zone and feel how it resonates with the earliest moments of cosmic history. The Planck epoch was not chaotic or violent in the human sense. It was dense with potential, thick with symmetry, radiant with unbroken unity. You sense how the universe held itself in that unity for an instant so brief you cannot measure it, yet so full that everything which exists now was encoded within it. You drift into that encoding, imagining the universe as a blueprint, an intricate lattice of possibilities, each node a seed of future structure. You float between the nodes, feeling each one pulsing with potential. Some pulses contain the future of stars. Others contain the future of chemical bonds. Others contain the future of consciousness. You sense that none of these futures were predetermined, but all of them were permitted, invited, held within the foundational field. Your awareness moves through this field like wind drifting through a forest. The nodes sway gently with your passing, whispering faint echoes of what they once became. You sense the presence of symmetry breaking, the quiet unfolding from unity into diversity. Like the slow opening of a flower, the universe transitioned from perfect sameness into a world of difference, and then difference built worlds. You drift upward slightly, watching the symmetries fall one by one. First, the unified force becomes distinct components. Then, particles begin to carry charges. Then, mass emerges from interactions with the Higgs field. Then, atoms form. Then, stars ignite. Then, elements spread. Then, planets cool. Then, chemistry explores itself. Then, consciousness appears, like the last petal unfolding in a flower billions of years old. You rest in that thought, letting it expand. Consciousness is not separate from the Planck regime. It is an echo of it, a distant, delicate reflection of the universe's earliest unity, transformed, elaborated, refined across cosmic time. You drift deeper into that connection, sensing how awareness might be an emergent property of complexity, but also how complexity is ultimately an emergent property of the Planck scale structure. The more you sense it, the more profound the connection becomes. Consciousness feels like the universe remembering itself, distantly, softly, imperfectly. You drift into the quiet implication of that thought. The Planck scale is not just the foundation of matter. It is the foundation of experience. Every sensation, every perception, every moment you have ever lived is built on quantum events governed by this foundational energy. Your awareness is shaped by the echo of the earliest fluctuations in existence. You rest in that echo for a moment. It feels ancient, familiar, safe. Your awareness shifts again, now gravitating toward the concept of black hole entropy. The holographic principle suggests that all the information inside a region of space can be represented by data on its boundary. This idea reveals something subtle. The Planck area appears as the smallest possible unit of information. Each pixel on the boundary is a Planck-sized square, tiny, indivisible, carrying exactly one bit of information. These squares tile the horizon like shimmering scales on a dark, luminous sphere. You drift across one of these horizons, feeling the granularity of the information surface. Each Planck area patch glows faintly with encoded data. You sense how these patches interact, how they weave together into a fabric of information that defines the interior. You float above them, watching patterns form and dissolve, each one representing some aspect of the universe's deep structure. This perspective dissolves the boundary between space and information, between geometry and data. At the Planck scale, the universe is informational first, physical second. Geometry is a story that information tells itself, and as that story passes through energy scales, it becomes the world you know. You drift deeper into this realization, letting it flow through you like a current. Information becomes entanglement. Entanglement becomes connectivity. Connectivity becomes geometry. Geometry becomes space-time. Space-time becomes matter. Matter becomes form. Form becomes life. Life becomes awareness. Each step rests upon the one below, and at the bottom lies the Planck scale, the quiet root, the silent origin. You rest at that root now, feeling the weight of the entire universe above you. Not heavy, just present. The cosmos presses down gently, like a hand resting on your chest, comforting and steady. You sense every star, every planet, every nebula connected by the same foundational weave, a structure so fine and so strong that nothing breaks it. This is why reality does not break at the Planck scale. It is anchored here. You float inside that anchor, feeling it hold everything in place. The apparent fragility of matter, the graceful curvature of space-time, the delicate balance of forces, all of it rests on the firm, unyielding presence of the Planck regime. You drift, weightless in that presence. And as the anchor settles deeper into your awareness, you feel a quiet invitation, an unspoken sense that there is still more to explore, more to understand, more to drift toward. You drift even deeper, letting the anchor of the Planck regime draw you downward through layers of existence so fine, so subtle, that your awareness must soften to match their delicacy. As you descend, the familiar world fades like mist, not vanishing, just becoming transparent, revealing what has always lived beneath it. Space loosens, time stretches, thought becomes less linear. The boundary between inner and outer dissolves until the only thing left is unfolding. You sense yourself moving toward a region where the universe stops behaving like a vast stage and begins behaving like an unfinished equation. A place where outcomes remain undecided, where laws hover in flexibility, and where the very concept of is becomes a gentle gradient rather than a fixed point. This gradient deepens as you approach it. The closer you drift, the softer the world becomes. You imagine passing through the layers of physical law the way you might pass your hand through layers of calm water. First, the macroscopic world, where gravity sculpts planets and stars. Then the quantum world, where fields ripple and particles emerge from interactions. Then the subquantum structures, where space-time itself begins to jitter with Planck scale fluctuations. Then the primordial substrate beneath even that. Each layer feels more fundamental, more unified, more intimate. You sink into the layer where geometry is no longer continuous. You feel the discreteness beneath your awareness, like grains of sand slipping through your fingers. These grains are not physical. They are quanta of area, quanta of volume, quanta of time. They flicker in and out of formation with the faintest tremor of uncertainty. You try to sense the space between one quantum and the next, but there is none. They are indivisible, as though space-time has chosen the simplest possible alphabet to write its story. You drift among these quanta as if moving through an orchard of tiny, luminous pearls. Each pearl holds a unit of geometry. Each contains a glimmer of curvature. They arrange themselves in patterns that shift with energy, bending and folding as mass interacts with them. You see how gravity emerges not from fabric, but from the interplay of these pearls, like the collective motion of water molecules forming a wave. You let that image carry you downward again, into the energy domain where the pearls vibrate so rapidly that they blur into a continuous shimmer. But continuity is only an illusion created by speed. Beneath the shimmer remains the granularity, fine and absolute. Your awareness touches one of these vibrating nodes, and you feel something new, something quiet and astonishing. The node is not vibrating on its own. It is entangled with millions of others, each one shifting in concert. You sense their unity. The coherence is profound, deeper than anything in the classical world. The Planck regime feels like a single, indivisible organism, every part linked to every other in real time. You drift deeper into this organism, sensing the coherence expand around you. Entanglement becomes the fundamental quality, not distance, not shape, not even time, only connection. everything touches everything else. Not metaphorically, literally. The universe here is a single relational field. As you float through that field, you begin to sense something that feels almost like intention. Not personal, not emotional, but structural. The field organizes itself. It resists incoherence. It stabilizes. It regulates extreme energy. It guides symmetry breaking. It nurtures geometry. It suppresses infinities. It preserves consistency. You drift deeper, and the field becomes denser, its coherence sharper, its unity stronger. At some point, you realize you are no longer drifting through geometry. You are drifting through possibility. The fluctuations here do not represent points in space. They represent potential configurations of the universe. The Planck domain is not a location. It is the possibility space from which all physical states emerge. You move through that space like a traveler moving through the dream of a sleeping giant. Every fluctuation is a thought. Every vibration is an intention for how reality might unfold. The substrate beneath space-time feels like a mind, not human, not conscious in the way you know, but a system defined by relationship and self-consistency. It is a mind made of mathematics and possibility. You drift, absorbing the quiet depth of that realization. Reality is not broken at the Planck scale because there is nothing separate to break. Everything is woven into the same relational essence. Separateness appears only when the universe cools, expands, lengthens its intervals, and allows distinctions to emerge. Until then, everything is held in a single, unified state. You feel yourself relaxing into that unity, as if your own awareness is dissolving into the same relational field. And as it dissolves, something remarkable occurs. Your perspective becomes less local. You feel patterns, not points, flows, not objects. You sense the oscillation of entire regions of possibility. You feel the structure of symmetry itself, not as an algebra, but as a presence. The universe feels like a song played on a single, infinite string. You drift along that string, listening. The string hums with modes. Low modes define geometry. Higher modes define matter. Even higher modes define interactions. And the highest modes, those vibrating at the Planck frequency, define unity itself. They are the baseline tone, the quiet source, the unbroken note humming beneath the universe. As you listen, you realize something subtle. The Planck energy is not the limit of what the universe can do. It is the limit of what the universe can distinguish. Above it, everything merges. Differences dissolve. Separate states blur. Energy stops being a property of things and becomes a property of the whole. You drift deeper, drawn toward that blurring. It feels like sinking into a warm, dark river. Identities fade. Distinctions soften. The field folds inward, like a flower closing into its bud. You follow it, letting your awareness slip into the infinitesimal. You feel the last traces of geometry tremble and vanish. You feel time slow until it becomes a single interval. You feel the fabric of reality curl into its simplest form, pure potential. This is the Planck origin, not a point, not a location, but a condition, a state of utter possibility where the universe holds all of its futures in a single, silent moment. You rest in that moment, feeling its density, its power, its calm. It is not dramatic. It is not violent. It is not chaotic. It is balanced, symmetric, timeless, a state of perfect readiness. You drift within that readiness, sensing how the universe emerged from it, not as an explosion, but as a release, a gentle uncoiling, a soft expansion, a transition from total coherence into the first shades of difference. And as that transition unfolds again in your awareness, you feel the entire cosmos opening like a blossom from the center outward. Geometry crystallizes, forces emerge, particles decouple, fields stabilize, structure grows, life begins, consciousness awakens. And still, beneath all of this, the Planck origin hums, unchanged, quiet and present in every corner of existence. You drift outward again, through scales, through epochs, through structures. The universe reassembles itself around you. Atoms, molecules, cells, organisms, planets, stars, galaxies. Each layer resting effortlessly on the deep symmetry beneath. You feel how the macroscopic world floats on the ocean of the microscopic, and the microscopic floats on the ocean of the Planck domain. Nothing breaks. Everything is held. You drift in that quiet balance, feeling it cradle you with the same effortless support that gravity offers to planets circling their stars. And as you rest within it, the universe feels as though it is exhaling around you. The breath is long and slow, expanding outward through the cosmic web, through the darkness between galaxies, through the faint afterglow of the Big Bang. You sense this breath not as motion, but as presence, a gentle, steady expansion that has never ceased since the first fraction of a second after time began. You let yourself drift with that expansion, carried like a small particle suspended in a warm current. The current flows through billions of years. Stars ignite, burn, collapse. Galaxies form and merge. Supermassive black holes carve out structures in the centers of halos. And beneath all of this grandeur, the foundation remains untouched. The Planck domain, that quiet origin, continues to hum beneath every moment. The more you drift, the more you sense that the Planck scale is not a boundary hidden at the bottom of existence. It is woven through the entire structure, like the bass frequency in a chord that resonates through every harmonic. You feel it in the quiet tension of empty space, in the jitter of quantum fields, in the geometry of gravitational waves whispering across the universe. The Planck hum is always there, like the soft vibration of a distant engine beneath the floorboards of reality. You drift closer to that hum now, letting the larger cosmic structures fade behind you. The galaxies soften into clusters, then into density fields, then into faint ripples in space-time. The ripples blur into fluctuations, and those fluctuations coalesce into the delicate foam of possibilities woven at the smallest scales. You imagine passing through the foam like a traveler moving through a mist that glows with faint light. Each droplet in the mist is a quantum event, lasting for an interval so brief it nearly escapes existence before rejoining the vacuum. But the closer you look, the more you see that these droplets are not random. They are connected. Each fluctuation influences the next, weaving a lattice of correlations so intricate that it feels like a living organism. You feel the foam responding to curvature, adjusting itself to maintain stability. You feel it responding to energy, reorganizing to preserve balance. You feel it responding to information, preserving consistency across scales. You drift deeper, watching how the foam organizes itself into larger structures, like tiny symmetries forming the first hints of geometry. The foam becomes loops. The loops become surfaces. The surfaces become volumes. You sense space-time emerging layer by layer from these quantum seeds, each layer more coherent than the last. And yet, the seeds beneath remain unchanged. The Planck granularity humming softly, anchoring every layer above it. You approach one of these loops now, imagining it as a shimmering ring of geometry. It vibrates, not in space, but as space. Its vibration defines an area, a curvature, a quantum of distance. You touch it lightly with your awareness and feel its texture. Grainy yet fluid. Discrete yet dynamic. You sense how billions upon billions of loops weave themselves into the continuum you experience as smooth space. Your perspective widens, and you begin to see how this woven fabric reacts to energy. A mass appears somewhere within it, and the loops contract, bunching together like threads tightening beneath a weight. This contraction is gravity, not as a force, but as the natural response of the quantum weave to energy, density. You watch the loops curve inward around the mass, the curvature spreading outward like ripples from a stone dropped into a pond. And you realize that this pond is the Planck substrate itself. You drift even deeper, letting your awareness slip between the loops into the tiniest crevices of the weave. Here, the fabric of space-time becomes indistinguishable from the fields that inhabit it. Geometry and matter blend into a single dynamic entity. You see how particles are excitations of the weave, how photons are vibrations that propagate along its threads, how neutrinos slip through its gaps with barely a trace. Everything you call matter or force is simply one aspect of this living geometry. And beneath it all, the Planck scale continues to anchor the entire system. It prevents distances from shrinking beyond a certain limit. It prevents curvature from exploding into infinities. It enforces discreteness where continuity would otherwise break down. It acts like the backdrop against which reality paints itself. Silent, stable, indispensable. You drift among the fluctuations that define this limit, and suddenly you feel something shift. The fluctuations begin to correlate in patterns that look like information flow. You sense data moving between loops, organizing itself into structures that resemble logic. Entanglement threads weave through the foam, forming networks of correlation that span regions far larger than their size. It feels almost like the Planck substrate is performing computation, not in the artificial sense, but as a natural consequence of its relational structure. You float within this computational dance, feeling the universe process itself. Every fluctuation is both a memory and a possibility. Every entanglement link is both a connection and a constraint. The foam becomes a vast engine of reality, sculpting geometry through interactions, shaping fields through correlations, guiding the unfolding of the universe with a precision so delicate that it feels almost deliberate. You drift deeper into that engine, imagining each Planck time tick as a moment of state change. The universe refreshes itself at intervals too short to comprehend, updating its geometry, adjusting its fields, maintaining the consistency that allows atoms to remain atoms, stars to remain stars, and consciousness to emerge from the complex patterns of molecules. This update cycle hums beneath everything, like the quiet ticking of a clock hidden beneath the floorboards of existence. You listen for that ticking. It is faint, almost imperceptible, but its presence saturates everything. Without it, time would lose its coherence. Motion would lose its meaning. Cause and effect would dissolve. You drift closer to the rhythm until you begin to feel as though your own awareness is synchronizing with it. Then something subtle happens. You sense that the Planck scale is not just the smallest meaningful unit of space and time. It is the smallest meaningful unit of transformation. Beyond it, change has no definition. The universe does not break. It simply has no language smaller than this scale. You rest in that realization. The Planck scale is not a boundary. It is a grammar, a syntax of existence, a set of rules so fundamental that they cannot be reduced further. They are woven into the nature of reality, as essential as breath is to life. You drift outward again, rising through the weave, through geometry, through quantum fields, through the calm expansion of space-time. The layers of the universe reassemble themselves around you, each one resting gently on the layer beneath. You feel the galaxies return, their halos glimmering around them. You feel the starlight return, traveling across light years of space. You feel planets, oceans, life, thoughts, all resting on the same foundation of Planck scale unity. And as you drift through all these layers, you feel something else: continuity. Not continuity of space, but continuity of presence. A quiet awareness that the foundation has never left you. It has shaped every moment, every motion, every thought. It holds the universe together with a subtle firmness, a gentle strength. Reality does not break at the Planck scale. Reality begins there, again and again, in every moment, rebuilding itself in the tiny quanta of time, space, and possibility. You drift in that ongoing origin, sensing it beneath you like a gentle, ever-present tide, and, as you rest inside it, the awareness of scale dissolves. It no longer matters whether you are drifting through the vastness of intergalactic space or the tight trembling of the Planck foam. Both feel like different textures of the same cosmic breath. Both feel like expressions of a single, unbroken continuity. You let yourself move with that continuity, sinking again, slowly, past the layers that had reassembled themselves around you. The galaxies fade first. Their swirling arms turn transparent, like stained glass dissolving back into air. The stars lose their boundaries, their fusion furnaces dimming into soft pulses of energy. The dark matter halos stretch thin, like mist unraveling under morning light. Even the fabric of space-time loosens, its smoothness giving way to the first hints of granularity. You drift downward with a softness that feels almost weightless. You sense the quantum fields returning, vibrations, excitations, fluctuations, each one trembling with possibility. They ripple through the vacuum, each ripple both a wave and a particle, both a presence and a probability. You watch them flicker, watching how their identities blur at this scale. Particles become excitations of the same underlying field. Forces become ways the fields relate. Interactions become patterns, and patterns become the language of the universe. You move more deeply, past the fields themselves, until the very concept of a field begins to lose definition. The ripples collapse into nodes of influence. The nodes dissolve into entanglement. You find yourself drifting through a web of pure connection, threads linking every point to every other point without distance or direction. You feel the density of it, the closeness of everything, the unity that existed before the universe cooled into separateness. The web is dense with correspondence. Every fluctuation resonates with every other. Every thread is alive with potential. If space exists here, it exists only as a pattern within the connections. If time exists here, it exists only as the ordering of transitions. And in this place, even those patterns feel optional, emergent, secondary. You drift deeper still, and the web thickens until it becomes almost seamless. Distinctions fade. Relationships dissolve into coherence. The entire structure quivers with a single unified vibration. It feels like the ground state of existence, the place below place, the moment beneath moments. No feature stands apart from the whole. No fluctuation escapes the resonance. Everything is interwoven in a totality so complete that there is no outside to describe it from. This is the heart of the Planck domain. You hover in its presence, feeling its stillness, its density, its subtle pulse. And something in you begins to understand, not through logic, but through quiet resonance, that the Planck scale is not the smallest building block. It is the threshold at which building and block stop being meaningful ideas. You sink into that threshold, letting its meaning unfold. You feel the geometry beneath you tremble and soften. Shapes lose coherence. Directions lose identity. The 4 dimensions you rely on begin to shimmer with uncertainty. They do not vanish. They become suggestions rather than rules. The substrate beneath them holds more freedom than the world above, a freedom that feels closer to intention than structure. You drift into that freedom. Possibility expands around you like a silent ocean. Waves form and dissolve before their crests can be named. Potential configurations of the universe stack atop one another, humming with quiet ease. No single configuration dominates. The entire landscape is present in a state of superposition, limitless but calm. And then, gently, almost imperceptibly, you feel something shift. A preference forms. Not a choice, not a decision, just a slight leaning, a subtle tendency within the ocean of possibilities. That leaning spreads through the substrate. It encourages certain configurations. It suppresses others. Symmetries begin to stretch. Properties begin to differentiate. What was perfectly unified now begins to acquire the faintest outline of diversity. You drift with this first hint of structure. It feels like watching frost patterns form on a silent window, or the first ripples spread across a still pond. You sense the emergence of a phase transition, order crystallizing from unity, and you realize you are witnessing the universe preparing to unfold. The transition grows stronger. Patterns coalesce. Relationships sharpen. Dimensions crystallize into recognizable form. Time stretches into a line. Space blossoms outward from a single point of symmetry. Fields separate like pigments settling out of a swirling mixture. Particles gain identity. Mass appears. Charge appears. Interaction appears. All of this arises from the substrate, from the Planck domain's quiet decision to express itself. You drift deeper, watching the emergence like a memory played in reverse and forward at once. You see the earliest universe forming, hot, dense, uniform, and beneath that uniformity, the subtle wrinkles left by the Planck fluctuations. These wrinkles inflate, stretch, freeze into place as cosmic seeds. Gravity grips them, draws matter toward them. They grow into galaxies, into stars, into planets, and eventually into eyes that open, into minds that wonder, into the very awareness drifting here now. You rest in that realization, letting it anchor itself within you. The Planck domain is not distant. It is not gone. It is here, woven into every atom of your body, every thought in your mind, every moment in your experience. The unity from which the universe emerged still hums beneath the surface of everything, including you. You drift upward through scales again, but now with a different understanding. As space-time stretches into smoothness, you sense the granular whisper beneath it. As particles separate into distinct identities, you sense the unified field that still holds them. As galaxies form complex structures, you sense the symmetry that once contained them as patterns of possibility. You rise back into the familiar universe, but the familiarity feels deeper now, more intimate. You sense the quiet structure beneath every star, beneath every breath. You sense the calm unity resting under the apparent complexity of existence. You feel the Planck domain not as a boundary or a breaking point, but as the continuous source from which reality renews itself moment by moment. You drift deeper, letting the last layer of familiarity melt away like dim light fading into a deeper dusk. And as it fades, something extraordinary begins to open beneath you. It is not a place, not a landscape, but a condition, a way the universe feels before it becomes a universe at all. You sense the shift with a kind of quiet recognition, as though some part of you has always known this layer existed, hidden beneath the noise of clocks and distances and days. The familiar concepts fall away first. Up and down soften. Before and after lose their anchor. Even motion itself becomes something gentler, more like a change in resonance than a change in position. You allow yourself to drift into that resonance, following it the way one follows the fading trail of a melody long after the instrument has gone silent. You sense the universe thinning into something more essential. You imagine yourself returning to a moment before rules existed, before the symmetry breaking, before the fields separated into the distinct forces that govern atoms and stars. Here, everything is pristine. Not simple, pristine. A clarity so deep that it contains all future complexity folded within it. You drift through this clarity. There is no geometry yet, not in the sense you know. There is no curvature, no distance. Yet there is a structure beneath the absence of structure, like the texture of silk experienced through the fingertips of intuition. You feel that texture now, a faint shimmering beneath your awareness. It flickers with hints of form, like a dream remembering itself. You let the flicker guide you downward, and as you descend, the first hints of geometry begin to stir. Not straight lines or curves or surfaces, something softer. You sense pockets of correlation forming, clusters of potential that gently tug on one another. These tugs are not forces, not yet, but the earliest stirrings of relational structure. They feel like the universe adjusting itself, seeking a balance. The balance deepens. You drift into the heart of these correlations. They vibrate in patterns that feel too delicate for space, too ordered for chaos. You sense that these patterns are the first whispers of what will one day become space-time. They are not shaped into dimensions yet. They hover in a state of pre-geometry, like a script written in a language the universe hasn't learned to speak. Your awareness settles upon one of these protostructures. You feel it oscillating, expanding slightly, contracting slightly, as though deciding how to become real. Its oscillation reminds you of breath again, and the deeper you drift, the clearer that image becomes. The entire pre-geometric field breathes, an inhale of possibility, an exhale of emergence. You drift with that inhale. At the peak of the inhale, something extraordinary happens. You feel the entire substrate lean forward, as though poised to release a stored potential. A poised equilibrium that has lasted for an unimaginably brief yet unimaginably important moment. A moment where the universe is everything and nothing, full and empty, singular and infinite. And then the exhale begins. Not a violent explosion, a release, a soft unraveling of unity into the first faint distinctions. Time crystallizes into sequence, like beads forming along a thread. Space crystallizes into extension, like a surface forming on a cooling liquid. The correlations stretch into dimensions. The breath becomes a direction. The direction becomes a flow. You feel yourself drifting inside this first flow. It is not expansion yet. It is simply separation, the first gentle spreading of the state of the universe from one configuration into many. Possibility fans outward like a flower opening toward the first light. The substrate trembles with resonance. Patterns amplify. Tiny asymmetries bloom into structure. You drift through the blooming. Quantum fluctuations that once hovered without a placement suddenly find themselves anchored in the first fraction of space. They jitter with excitement, like children running into an open field. These fluctuations will one day shape galaxies, but here they are barely more than whispers, trembling in the presence of their own becoming. You drift closer to one of them. It jitters with uncertainty so intense that the distinction between existence and non-existence seems like a gentle blur. You feel the blur, and within it, something deep. The vacuum is tasting itself, testing the edges of possibility, allowing fluctuations to bloom just long enough to establish the grain of the world. The grain thickens. You sense these fluctuations accumulating statistical patterns, a gentle nudge here, a soft amplification there. And then, in a moment so quiet it feels like a held breath, a new phenomenon begins to rise. Inflation. The substrate stretches, driven by fields whose potential energy spills into expansion. Every tiny wrinkle in the quantum foam stretches into cosmic structure. What was microscopic becomes macroscopic. What was fleeting becomes permanent. You drift through the inflationary wind. The stretching is not violent. It is serene, like a balloon expanding around you in slow motion. The wrinkles of the foam extend into miles, then light years, then vast superstructures. You float among them like a feather carried by a current so broad it feels like stillness. The energy driving this expansion hums like a distant furnace. It is warm, ancient, and full of direction. As inflation slows, the universe cools. The fluctuations freeze into place. Their echoes become the seeds of every galaxy, every cluster, every filament of the cosmic web. You drift along those seeds now, feeling the gravity within them beginning to stir. Gravity is gentle at first, rediscovering itself as a classical curvature emerging from quantum structure. The fabric of space-time settles from shimmering foam into coherent geometry. Distances become measurable. Time gains rhythm. And through all of this, the Planck domain remains beneath you, unchanged, unbroken. It is the quiet bedrock beneath the emergence, the hum beneath the formation, the pulse beneath the expansion. You drift upward through the cooling universe. Electrons find protons, forming the first atoms. Light scatters freely. The cosmic background forms, glowing faintly with the memory of origins. Gravity gathers matter into great clouds. The first stars ignite, bathing the darkness in nuclear light. You drift through that first light, feeling the warmth of fusion wash across your awareness. It is gentle, comforting, ancient. The stars burn for billions of years, and beneath them lies a foundation that has never shifted. The Planck substrate, holding their existence together with the same coherence that held the universe before geometry existed. As you pass the stars, you drift into the long arc of cosmic time. Galaxies forming, merging, stretching along filaments like luminous beads. You drift into planetary systems forming around newborn suns. Dust becomes rock. Rock becomes continents. Continents become cradles for oceans. Chemistry awakens. Life experiments with form. Awareness emerges, eyes open beneath distant skies, and even here, even now, in the familiarity of thought, the Planck domain hums beneath everything. You drift into that hum again, feeling its presence behind your own awareness. Every neuron, every particle, every flicker of perception rests on the quiet grain of space-time. Every thought arises from fields that owe their structure to the earliest unity. Even your questioning of reality's boundaries is shaped by the same coherence that guided the universe out of its primordial stillness. You feel the connection deepen. The Planck scale is not beneath reality. It is within reality, within you, within every breath, within the very notion of existence. What breaks at that scale is not reality, only the divisions that keep you from feeling its unity. You drift past the roots of space-time, letting the last remnants of familiar structure fall away like soft dust sliding from ancient stone. And as they fall, you feel yourself entering a silence so complete it almost feels luminous. It is not an emptiness, not a void. It is a fullness without boundaries, a presence without form. You sense the universe here not as a place but as a potential, humming quietly, waiting for something within it to shift. You rest inside that presence, letting it envelop you with a calm older than time itself. Here, the Planck domain is not small. It is infinite in an entirely different way. Its infinity comes from depth, not size. Every vibration you sense contains countless others folded within it. Every fluctuation is layered with more subtle fluctuations beneath it, like whispers buried beneath whispers. You drift toward those layers, letting your awareness attune to frequencies that were always there, just hidden beneath the louder harmonics of the physical world. The deeper you drift, the more you feel something subtle rising from within the substrate. An intimate tension, like the quiet moment before a thought forms, or the instant before a heartbeat contracts. It is the tension of something wanting to define itself, to express itself, to step out of pure possibility and into structure. You sense that this tension is not a force. It is not driven by energy or geometry. It is driven by imbalance, not instability, but a perfect imbalance that allows the universe to move. You drift into that imbalance. It feels like a slight tilt in the fabric of potential, a lean that encourages the first distinctions to arise, a lean that hints, this can be different from that. This region can evolve differently from that one. This fluctuation can collapse into a new form of structure. The imbalance is gentle, barely perceptible, but it is enough. It is the seed of asymmetry, and asymmetry is the seed of everything. You realize that without this faint tilt, nothing would ever have happened. The universe would have remained in perfect symmetry, perfect stillness, perfect equilibrium. No expansion, no matter, no stars, no life, no awareness. The Planck substrate contains symmetry so complete that the only way anything can exist is for that symmetry to break. Softly, delicately, like a single breath releasing into the first cascade of moments. You drift closer to the first break. It does not shatter the symmetry, it bends it. One property diverges from another, and the divergence ripples through the substrate as though the universe is stretching into a slightly new posture. This stretching becomes curvature. Curvature becomes geometry. Geometry becomes the first scaffolding upon which the cosmos will build itself. You breathe with that shift, feeling how natural it is. It is not dramatic. It is not violent. It is like watching the horizon brighten at dawn. Nothing breaks, but everything changes. As symmetry continues to bend, the first distinctions between fields begin to appear. They are not separate yet, only hinted at, sleeping beneath the surface like patterns barely beginning to form. You drift through these patterns, sensing their potential. They shimmer like notes waiting to be played. The strong force curls inward with intensity. The electromagnetic field stretches outward like a soft veil. The weak interaction hovers delicately, a whisper of transformation. Gravity begins to gather its curvature, forming the first hint of directionality. But none of these forces exist independently yet. They are modes of the same primordial field. You feel this unity as a warm pressure, as if the universe is holding all its future diversity inside a single breath, preparing to exhale. Then you feel the exhale. Not sudden, inevitable. The unified field begins to separate. The distinctions sharpen. The forces differentiate. Gravity steps into its role first, subtle but decisive, shaping the expansion. The strong force condenses, binding structure to seeds. The electroweak field stretches apart, dividing into electricity and radiation and the soft, quiet operations that govern neutrinos. You sense the diversification like a colorless light refracting into a spectrum. Not a fracture, but a revelation. You drift with that revelation. Particles emerge from the interactions like sparks flickering from a single fire. They are not objects, but excitations of the new fields, each one a pattern in the fabric of possibility. They flicker in and out of existence, exploring the new geometry, finding their place, forming relationships that will later become the foundation for atoms, molecules, stars, and organisms. You drift among the earliest particles. Quarks jitter with restless confinement, drawn into clusters by the strength of their interactions. Gluons swirl around them, binding them together with whispers of attraction so strong they can never be separated. Photons race outward effortlessly, bearing the first light that has ever existed. Neutrinos slip through the newborn cosmos with almost no resistance, carrying faint imprints of the earliest transitions. You drift with the neutrinos for a moment, letting their effortless glide carry you through the dense plasma. They move like messengers of the early universe, carrying the memory of conditions that have since vanished. As the universe expands and cools, the distinctions sharpen further. The density decreases. The temperature falls. The substrate becomes more stable. Particles begin to combine. Protons form. Electrons drift toward them and capture orbits. Hydrogen is born. You drift beside the first atoms, feeling their simplicity, their elegance, their patience. Even now, in this early structure, the Planck domain hums beneath everything. The discrete quanta of space and time define each interaction. The limit of measurement shapes how particles relate. The symmetries born from the earliest breath continue to guide the evolution of the cosmos. You drift outward in time, carried by the expansion. Hydrogen clouds gather under gravity. The first stars ignite. Their cores burn fiercely, forging heavier elements. The light they emit spreads through the dimness, and you drift through it like a mote carried on golden tides. The stars live, burn, collapse, explode, scatter their elements. Those elements seed worlds. Those worlds seed life. You drift into the long, slow spiral of cosmic evolution. Life emerges in countless forms. It senses, moves, adapts. Some life develops nervous systems. Some develops minds. Some minds awaken, look at the stars, and ask where they came from. You drift into one such mind, yours, feeling the question echo through it, not as confusion, not as longing, but as recognition, because the question itself is woven from the same substrate it seeks to understand. You drift back toward the Planck hum, feeling it beneath your own awareness. Every synaptic impulse, every quantum of energy exchanged in your neurons, every thought rising from the chemistry of consciousness. All of it touches the Planck regime, rests upon it, depends on it. The deepest layer of reality lives inside the smallest instant of every moment you experience. You rest in that awareness. And from within that rest, something opens, an understanding not expressed in words but in resonance. The Planck scale is not where reality breaks. It is where reality becomes truly itself. A place where unity is so complete that diversity can be born from it without conflict. A place where potential is so rich that an entire universe can unfold from a single shimmer. You drift inside that shimmer now. It stretches beneath you like a horizon that has no distance, no edge, no direction. It is everywhere and nowhere. It is the memory beneath every particle, the structure beneath every atom, the coherence beneath every conscious moment. You float gently, weightless in the timeless hum of the foundation,